This is how I built my Dragonblight shield from EVA foam using Pepakura and a custom 3D model. I created a 3D model referencing the in-game look and imported it into Pepakura. It's only half-sided because it's perfectly mirrored and I can flip over the patterns for the other side. Using Pepakura, which is a paper folding program, I can unfold the 3D model into a 2D pattern set. After printing everything on paper sheets, I just cut out the patterns. I try to kind of smooth out the lines that are in the 3D model because it's a very low polygon 3D model. So I mark out where I need to cut sharp edges and where I need to round off a little bit. I'm basically just guessing a little bit on which parts need to be curved and how much, but usually it works out. I used this 20mm sheet from Foamforge to create the base of my shield. This foam sheet was just the right thickness and size to create the base of my shield. I'm cutting 2 halves and cutting a slight bevel in the middle so I can create a curved or angled shield. I'm using a ceramic snap-off blade. I've been really liking these ceramic blades. They last a lot longer and stay sharper for longer than the steel blades, but they snap a little bit easier. Now I'm cutting the slanted edge bevel cut for the middle. I'm using a metal ruler and simply kind of freehand the angle. I apply Barge contact cement to both edges and making sure everything is nicely covered. Especially the outer edge, that's the part that needs to be glued perfectly, without any seams. I line up the beauty side first, making sure that everything is perfectly aligned, and then press down to fit the rest. And that's the base of my shield done. Now I want to create the outer edge. The outline of the shield has various curves and cuts in it, but I don't want to do this all by hand, so I'm just simply cutting some strips with bevel cuts to create the outline. Then, like a miter, I am cutting these into pieces to fit the outside edge. And for the curves, I pre-shape the foam a little bit so I can make sure that this aligns perfectly. Then I'm miter cutting everything to fit the outer edge. I mostly eyeball these miter cuts because the nice thing about EVA foam is that you can stretch and pinch it a little bit in case the angle isn't perfect. By using a heat gun, I can create a more permanent curve for those bits. By stretching, pinching and pulling on the foam, I can create a permanent angle. I don't glue down the sections yet, I set them aside before everything's done. Once I'm happy with all the sections, I'm gluing the butts together before I'm gluing it to the shield. This way I can make sure that all the edges and the corners are perfectly aligned before gluing it to the shield, and I don't have to do any cleanup later. Once my edge is glued up, I am aligning it to the shield and using a marker to check where it aligns up. The marker line will tell me where I need to glue. I apply glue to the shield and to the bevel outline. After waiting for a little bit for the glue to become dry and tacky, I apply the outer edge first. I keep a finger between the outline and the shield to make sure that it doesn't stick yet. This way I can still make adjustments before I press down fully. And I don't have to do any cleanup on the outer edge of the shield. Now I'm pressing down the entire outline. And that's the edge done. To create the dragon face, I have 4 different sections. I'm starting with the forehead. Using the 3D model and the paper pattern, I can quickly see where the pieces need to go and what angle I need to cut. Sometimes I mark it on the paper pattern to tell me which angle I need to cut at. For example, a 45-degree angle on both pieces of foam will result in a straight cut. After cutting all my pieces, I again apply glue to all edges. Make sure your glue is dried up a little bit so it doesn't look wet anymore, and then it's ready to glue. Since I have to wait for the glue to dry, I simply glue up multiple pieces anyway. And then in a few minutes, as I'm done gluing, usually the first pieces are ready to be bonded together. Again, I'm using my fingers to align the outer edge first before pressing down, to get the cleanest seam. I'm using 6mm EVA foam for the dragon face on the shield. Next up are the horns. I'm using a marker and a preview on my 3D app to see which edges need to be smoothed out and which corners need to be sharp. This will give you that final look in the curvature in your 3D foam shape. I need 2 horns of opposite sides, so I'm fitting and flipping my pattern to see which alignment works best. To create both sides, I need to flip over my pattern anyway. Again, I'm bevel cutting at about a 45-degree angle with freehand. Applying glue to multiple pieces, so my first piece is ready to be bonded when I'm done applying glue to the last piece. The horns are a bit trickier because they're curved, so I start aligning them at the opposite ends and then work towards the middle. You can also use registration marks to keep the shape even. Next up is the face of the dragon around the eyes. The last part is the jaw piece. The jaw piece pattern had a few tricky curves, so I used my heat gun to help me shape the foam. The 4 main shapes of the dragon face are done. They're not bonded together yet, so that's the next thing I'm going to do. To attach the pieces together, I align them the way I want them to be positioned and use the marker to identify where I need to apply the glue. Some areas needed a sharper angle than I could cut with my knife, so I used my sanding tool to create a shallower angle. I didn't bother using the pattern to create the teeth. It is easier to freehand these, just based on the look and the fitment that you get. My face is done. I didn't attach it to the shield yet, so I could paint it individually. The first layer is a Plastidip layer. The rubber coating helps to seal the foam up and prevent any paint from getting too absorbed into the foam. This creates a nice even paint layer without too many bubbles in it. To paint the shield, which I also wanted to paint with Plastidip, I applied some tape where I wanted it to be glued down. Because if you use glue on a paint layer or a rubber layer, it won't bond very well. Again, Plastidip is used over the entire shield. After the Plastidip, I applied a little bit of silver. Most of the shield is silver, so a silver spray can was the easiest way to do this. When using spray cans on EVA foam, make sure you're not using any automotive, lacquer or enamel spray paints. And you use a rubber undercoating such as Plastidip. Usually it will turn out to be a flexible coating, and it won't crack when you bend the foam. Acrylic spray paints and water-based spray paints work best for not cracking while flexing on EVA foam. Next, I'm applying the orange background. It's a little bit of a splotchy orange background, so I'm applying it by brush. There was no need to get like a super even color, but by using some painter's tape on the edge, I could make sure that I could just freehand the entire thing. Using a sponge with a lighter mixed color, I could add some highlights with splotches. The next step was to add some raw umber color, which is a dark brown color perfect for accentuating and adding shadows and dirt to all sorts of pieces and make the contrast higher with other colors. The shield is almost done, but first I want to add some more details to my dragon head. Using dark brown, I am accentuating and shadowing all the edges on the dragon head to give it more of a contrast with the 3D shape. After the shading, I am using some silver rub and buff to bring out more highlights. I apply it to a cloth and rub it over all the high points in the 3D shield. Next step was to add some LED lights. Because I hadn't glued my dragon head to the shield yet, it was very easy to use the backside to install lights. I'm using some white chiffon fabric to diffuse the light and give a little bit of a smoky, swirly feel. These are RGB USB powered LEDs with a remote control that can select the color. That's why I chose white chiffon for the fabric, because it will be able to reflect any color that I choose. When gluing the white chiffon into the head, I'm using some hot glue and I'm purposely kind of folding over the fabric to create a smoky style. Because this is very thin fabric, you need to be careful not to burn your fingers with the hot glue. Using my heat gun, I can shrink the polyester fabric a little bit to make it a little bit of a tighter look. I flipped over the head and tried to install my LEDs. I bought 1 meter of LEDs and thought it would be enough to cover the entire area, but it was just a tiny bit too small to cover the entire area without having to cut the LED strip. So unfortunately I had to cut it up for sections for the eyes and for the mouth and soldering together. If only it was a tiny bit longer, I could simply glue it all around the edges without having to cut it up. Once the soldering was done and everything was tested, I could attach the LED strip using the adhesive backing into the head. I cut a hole in the shield so I could attach the battery to the back of the shield. I then glued the head to the shield. I already had everything outlined, so I knew exactly where to apply the glue. Now it's done, but I still have to add a few small details, and I have to add a battery pack and a handle for the shield on the backside. To create a handle, I'm using a foam dowel. I had a leftover leather strap that I attached to some foam pieces with Chicago screws and then glued to the shield. And then for the handle, I wrapped it in some spare red ribbon. I wanted to create a little pocket to keep my battery pack in, so I drafted it up in tape and paper. Once I'm happy with the shape, I transferred the pattern to foam and glued it to the backside. I nearly forgot some spikes that were detailed on the front, so I'm adding those now. And that's the shield complete. It's super large, lightweight, and it looks awesome. The free pattern to the Pepakura file is a download on my website, so you can check it out yourself and see how I use 3D modeling to create a foam pattern.